homies, we fuck with the FEDDY. Sit your ass down, buckle up and get ready. James ain't hand me the edit and Eddie. She asked for the dick, but I gave her the FEDDY.
Alright, welcome back to my Federalist paper series. Today we're going to be taking a look at Federalist 6, which is called Concerning Dangers from Dissensions Between the States. It was published on November 14th, 1787, and written by Alexander Hamilton. So Hamilton starts the paper by pivoting away from the threat of foreign influence to the threat of domestic influence. Hamilton says that it is naive to believe that disunited nations could live amongst one another peacefully. He leverages the argument of malicious human nature, saying that men are ambitious, vindictive, and rapacious. Hamilton enumerates several causes of war, including megalomania, conquest, jealousy of power, national security, and conflicts of international commerce. To get a little more specific, he leverages two historical analogs to make his case. The first is in reference to Pericles, an Athenian general during the Golden Age of Athens who, according to ancient historians like Plutarch, was believed to have started the Second Peloponnesian War. The war was fought between the Athenian Delian League and the Spartan Peloponnesian League from 431 to 404 BC. Hamilton specifically references Pericles' companion Aspasia, who supposedly stoked the passions of Pericles and convinced him to support her hometown of Miletus against the city-state of Samos during the Samian War in 440 BC. He also takes note of the Megarian Decree, which was an economic policy that levied sanctions against Megara in 432 BC by the Athenian Empire. Lastly, Hamilton claims that Pericles used war as a tactic of diverting attention away from his liberal spending of public funds, including the construction of the Acropolis of Athens and the Parthenon. Through these examples, Hamilton is able to point to several different causes of the Second Peloponnesian War. Pericles' passions, poor economic policy, and poor domestic policy all contributed towards the breakdown of the 30 years peace established between Athens and Sparta after the First Peloponnesian War. Hamilton's second example pertains to Thomas Wolsey, a Catholic cardinal who served as the Lord Chancellor of King Henry VIII of England. Hamilton claims that Wolsey's desire for the papacy influenced his foreign policy decisions during the Anglo-French War. Specifically, he wanted to gain the support of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. What Hamilton is trying to convey here is that the personal ambitions of one man could potentially drag an entire country into war behind him. It's worth noting that Wolsey did not start the Anglo-French War. In fact, he wasn't even appointed to a foreign policy position at the start of the war. So Hamilton's example is better fitted to how the events and tactics of warfare could be influenced by a single man, not necessarily started. With that said, European history has a plethora of examples of men who declared war for their selfish ambitions. From here, Hamilton steelmans the position of anti-federalists who believe that commercial interests of neighboring sovereign states will be sufficient in protecting against warfare. The genius of republics, say they, is specific. The spirit of commerce has a tendency to soften the manners of men and to extinguish those inflammable humors which have so often kindled into wars. Commercial republics, like ours, will never be disposed to waste themselves in ruinous contentions with each other. They will be governed by mutual interest and will cultivate a spirit of mutual amity and concord. Their argument essentially boils down to mutual assurance, an idea popularized by the political philosopher Montesquieu. No state in the right mind would sabotage commercial treatises for the sake of war. Hamilton argues that this view is overly idealistic and ignores the emotional and impulsive aspects of human nature. While purely rational agents may be able to operate in such an environment, men driven by short-term passions and flaws in reasoning cannot. Has it not, on the contrary, invariably been found that momentary passions and immediate interest have a more active and imperious control over human conduct than general or remote considerations of policy, utility, or justice? Have republics in practice been less addicted to war than monarchies? Are not the former administered by men as well as the latter? Between rivalries, jealousies, greed, lapses of judgment, egotistical urges of conquest, men have time and again declared war under irrational pretenses. Mutual commercial interests alone cannot prevent this intrinsic human attribute from manifesting. Hamilton notes that the mode of governance is no guarantee. While most European countries were monarchies during the Middle Ages, republics like Sparta, Athens, Rome, and Carthage did exist in ancient times. With that being said, these ancient republics were no less averse to warfare than the medieval monarchies. Even republics with developed commercial ties to their neighbors, such as Athens and Carthage, often engaged in warfare. Hamilton also points to the British Empire's Parliament, established with the Acts of Union in 1707. Despite adopting this aspect of republicanism and their emphasis on commercial prosperity, they have fought in numerous wars in less than a century of their existence. This exemplifies war driven by a collective, or by representatives of the people, not a single entity. These numerous historical examples makes it clear that Hamilton doesn't see commercial interests as a proper repellent of conflict. In fact, he takes it a step further by insinuating that trade deals can sometimes provoke hostility. This was the case with the rival houses of Austria and the French Bourbon. The wars of these two last-mentioned nations have in a great measure grown out of commercial considerations, the desire of supplanting and the fear of being supplanted, either in particular branches of traffic or in the general advantages of trade and navigation, and sometimes even the more culpable desire of sharing in the commerce of other nations without their consent. So Hamilton ends the paper basically by saying that unification is the best safeguard against warfare. Neighboring nations, says he, are naturally enemies of each other unless their common weakness forces them to league in a confederate republic, and their constitution prevents the differences that neighborhood occasions, extinguishing that secret jealousy which disposes all states to aggrandize themselves at the expense of their neighbors. So a big part of this paper focused on collecting a bunch of these historical examples to show how the more irrational aspects of men can lead to declarations of war regardless of a state's architecture. Hamilton called upon ancient democracies like Athens, absolute monarchies like France, and constitutional monarchies like Great Britain to show us that they are all prone to the flaws of human nature. So human nature was a topic that Hamilton touched on in the first Federalist paper. It was an important consideration in political philosophy at the time, especially in the construction of the philosophy of liberalism. In essence, we know that humans are not behaviorally homogeneous, and ideally, civil governance should try to find a balance between maximizing human liberties and minimizing the actions of malicious agents. We saw with Pericles of ancient Athens and Thomas Wolsey of medieval England that ambition, lust, and megalomania can be strong drivers of warfare initiation and orientation, often at the expense of the general public. These irrational causes for war can more easily manifest from a single person, and while Hamilton did admit that collectives can at times be warmongers, as we saw with Great Britain's parliament, there poses a greater risk when a single agent has the final say. Hamilton also made it clear that established treatises and trade deals are not sufficient in preventing war as well. Once again, leveraging the argument of flawed human nature, men have demonstrated since time immemorial that rationale is not the sole driver of decision-making. Monarchs and parliaments have sabotaged alliances and international trade routes in pursuit of war hundreds of times before. Why would that change going forward? Hamilton makes it clear that unification is the best way to prevent warfare. There's an aspect of realism regarding human nature here that sovereign nations will always be at risk of warring with their neighbors, and treatises alone cannot deter irrational entities from seeking war. As such, the best way to preserve peace is by uniting as a single nation, ensuring that all states are under federal jurisdiction and are collaborative in their legislative efforts. Given the extensive history of warfare in Europe, it's difficult to argue with Hamilton's logic here. Of course, we've seen that unification alone is not entirely foolproof, as exemplified by the American Civil War. The sovereignty of the Confederacy was self-declared, but never recognized by the United States or any foreign government, so whether you want to interpret the war as between two sovereignties is up for debate. Despite the Civil War, the unification of America has ensured long-lasting prosperity and intergovernmental diplomacy between the states, and the Constitution found a reliable balance between autonomous state rights and a binding form of federalism. While it isn't explicitly stated, it was evident to Hamilton and other founding fathers that the power of war declarations was best handled collectively. The last thing they wanted in the new Constitution was a warmonger of a president roping the US into unnecessary conflicts, especially since the War of Independence devastated the economy. This was likely the rationale behind the War Clause in Article 1, Section 8, which gave Congress the sole ability to declare war. In practice, a formal declaration of war is typically introduced as a joint resolution that is debated on and refined by the Foreign Affairs or Foreign Relations Committees. From there, if the text gets a simple majority in both chambers of Congress, it is sent to the president for sign-off. While there's always the possibility of faulty reasoning for war, having the declaration process handled by a plurality diminishes the influence of malicious agents. This constitutional clause prevents any one bad actor from dragging the nation into a potentially unjust conflict. Of course, that is just in theory. In reality, we've seen an increase of executive influence when it comes to military operations. For example, the War Powers Resolution passed in 1973 allows the president to authorize a military attack, given that they notify Congress within 48 hours and forbid armed forces to remain there for more than 60 to 90 days. Most recently, the act has been leveraged by Donald Trump to conduct airstrikes in Iran, leading to the 2026 Iran War. As of the recording of this video, the conflict has been going on for roughly 2 weeks and has led to the death of at least 7 American servicemen. This has led to a fiery debate regarding presidential authority and wartime declarations, and many critics have deemed this operation to be unconstitutional. Given that Trump is known for being impulsive and egomaniacal, it's easy to draw parallels between Operation Epic Fury and many irrational conflicts of the past. As opposed to taking a balanced and intelligent approach towards a volatile political environment, the impulsive and malicious behavior of a single individual abandons diplomacy in favor of militancy. Situations like these best exemplify the reasoning of our founding fathers and why they wanted war to only be approved by Congress. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching, I greatly appreciate it. Federalist 7 is going to be a continuation of this subject, so you should definitely check back in a week or two whenever I upload the next video. And yeah, that's all I got for today, so thank you very much, and until next time.